Hello everyone, and I'm so happy that Douglas, who and I were going to speak about what to do to remain calm in a pretty shaky state of the world right now, and also which affects many at in a business context. And anyway, I mean, Doug, just for you to know, Douglas and I, we know each other for almost a decade, and we coach together clients, we work together on a regular basis, and I thought it would be really um, beneficial under these circumstances to have someone who comes from the psychotherapeutic area and to talk about how can we deal with this shaky uh, s- stadium that we are more or less all in right now. And we will be focusing the questions, just for you to know, more. I mean, they won't be too personal. It's more about a business context and what can be, or how Doug, what he would like to share with us, um, what we can do. So, Doug, I'm so happy that we do that, this webinar together. And maybe for the audience, can you maybe share a few words about you, what you're doing, your background?
Absolutely. Well, hello everyone. My understanding, Catherine, is most people are from Europe. Is that right?
Yes, Europe mostly, but I do. There are many people also in the US with whom I'm in touch with.
Okay, got it. All right. Well, again, my name is Douglas Gosney, and I am a psychotherapist in Los Angeles and have been for the last 40 years. And I'm also the past president of the Los Angeles chapter of the California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists. And how I got involved in this work was I grew up in a pretty crazy family. So I decided to become a therapist to help sort that out. So I've been doing that for the rest of my life, and I'm still doing it, and I'm sure I'll continue doing it. 2 years ago, I was introduced to a new type of therapy that I'd never heard of before, and I've been around the block. I've studied therapy in Europe. I've been in Switzerland and a little bit in Germany many years ago, Norway. I've gone to India to find more of a spiritual psychology. And 2 years ago, I was introduced to this new therapy called internal family systems, or IFS for short. And I didn't know what that was. I'd never heard of it. But people in the field of addiction and trauma were saying to me, you need to find out about this stuff. This is really good work. And so I started looking into it and discovered that the fellow who had originated it, his name is Richard Schwartz, who was actually teaching at Harvard, teaching internal family systems at Harvard. And I really liked what he had to say, and it made a lot of sense. And it took all my 40 years of experience and put it into an understandable bucket that just was really delightful for me. Like, oh, well, this all makes sense now. It really put together a lot of things that I hadn't been able to put together before. And I'll talk with you a little bit more about that approach that he uncovered. And so training to learn as a therapist how to do internal family systems work, you had to go into a lottery of 10,000 therapists that were trying to get into this training. And they only take 30 people every 3 months to do the training. And I'm thinking, I'm getting older, I don't have time for this. And so I went to Dick Schwartz and I said, is there any way I can bypass this lottery? And he says, well, they're teaching a course at Harvard that I'm part of. He said, you could sign up for that, and you have to apply, but it's not a lottery, and maybe you could get into that. So I applied, and I wrote a personal letter to him and his psychologist wife and said, if you can get me into this training or do something to help me get into the training, I'd really appreciate it. Well, I got in, and it's just been a fabulous training, a fabulous experience. And so I want to go into some detail what I've been learning. So Dick Schwartz was a family therapist. So he was used to working with families, and at times he'd have to tell a family member, I really want to hear your point of view, but I can only listen to Sally right now at this moment, but I'll come back to you. Would that be okay with you? So he'd have to negotiate with the different family members. But one day he woke up to realize that everybody has like a multiplicity of parts within them. It's like they have a bunch of family members within them, a part that can get enraged, a part that can feel depressed, a part that can get frustrated, a part that has eating disorders, a part that, is hopeless or suicidal. And so he started thinking, gee, I wonder if there's a way I can use this family therapy model to deal with these internal parts. So he started experimenting with it, and he started getting really good results with it. And then he said, well, let me try it with different populations. So he went and started working with people that had extreme eating disorders to see if his model worked with them, and it did. And then he thought, well, let me take it to people in prisons who are there for violence and murder and stuff, and see if it works with them. Well, it did. And so he started getting really excited about this model that he had stumbled upon. And he called it that he would help people get to know their parts that can carry extreme feelings and beliefs, or that are suffering from leftover childhood experiences that were overwhelming or adverse. And then he would help those parts feel seen and heard and acknowledged and safe. And then they started coming forth with their traumatic feelings and their traumatic memories. And he would make room for that. And then what would happen is that people would seem like they were getting unburdened of things they'd been carrying for decades, some of them. And so he called this an unburdening process. But he kept on noticing the same thing showing up, is that everybody kept going to the same place after enough unburdening, which he started calling the self with capital letters. And what he described as the self, and I put the self qualities in the chat. If you wanted to look at it, you could follow along with me. Qualities of the self are that you're curious, calm, courageous, compassionate, creative, connected, confident, clear, and with the ability to have a choice. Mm-hmm. So that's where people kept on going to with those qualities. And he said, well, it seems that this is something that's inside people, that's always there, that can't be changed. Now we can get blended with wounded parts, and then we forget we have a self, but the self is still there, and we can go back and make room for it and help parts unburden so that we can get back in touch with our essence, what we're born with, where there's nothing wrong with this. Mm-hmm. So, and what I have found in working with my clients and also working with my own wounded parts is that the theory works. It makes sense. And it works. And it's not fast, because, it took a long time to get really beat up by our childhoods, and one of the things I've noticed as a therapist is nobody escapes childhood without some sort of sensitivity or some sort of issue. It's just human to have that. So, but if we're being run by paranoid parts, for example, that paranoid part is going to be missing some of the qualities of the self. That if you're paranoid, it's harder to be curious. If you're paranoid, it's harder to be compassionate and connected. So he kept on finding that people would just show up in their self, what he called in their self energy. And from self energy, they started becoming self-led. with their own parts. So instead of being parts led with wounded parts making our life decisions, they become self led from these 8C qualities of curiosity and calm and compassion and so forth. So I have found this to be very, very, very real, and it works. So what he found is that in working with people's parts, he started realizing that there's inner parts that basically fall under 3 categories. There's exiled parts, which usually get sloughed off from the self at a very early age due to trauma. It can even be birth trauma, or being neglected at some place in childhood, or experiencing physical abuse or sexual abuse. All of these things then become something that the system has to deal with. So sometimes, like in my case, I had a very strong manager part that went, okay, you were, um, you were physically abused by both of your parents, and that was very traumatic and painful. So I'm not going to subject you to those memories at all, because that's really overwhelming and painful. So I'm going to set your life up so you don't ever have to go there. So it kept my life kind of small and more manageable because it was smaller. And but then there was a time when, and I'd been a therapist for 20 years, and I started running into things that I didn't really know how to deal with. And and I was in therapy, but I still didn't know how to deal with some of these things that were coming up for me that was leaving me anxious and overwhelmed. And so I started getting really interested in expensive tequilas. And so I would come home from work and hit the back door and pour a big glass of tequila, and sometimes go to a blackout, which felt better than than sitting in extreme anxiety for hours or days on end. And but drinking a lot of tequila also has its downsides. So I started looking at, well, how else can I deal with this? And so I actually did a multi-year stint in AA, which was helpful. It kept me alive, but I had suicidal parts also. Even though I was a therapist, done a lot of therapy, I had these suicidal parts that would show up every once in a while. And my firefighter parts would jump in and go, okay, it's time to do something extreme. Go do an extreme athletic event. That'll get your attention out there, or go drink some tequila. That'll help you feel better. But again, those things have their downsides. When I started doing internal family systems for myself, I got a guide, I got a coach to help me with my own parts. I started getting more relief in my system from the trauma I still carried, and realized that a lot of the therapy that I had done in the past kept me in my head, trying to understand my situation, my family, my childhood, my parents. But I understood all that quite well, and I still felt like killing myself. So understanding doesn't go far enough in my experience. So with 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 that, I started opening up to it. Okay, my managers have kept my life small, and now I feel like I want to get out in a bigger way into the world. And so a year ago, I took on a big job working with a company that helps families that have adopted children out of the foster care system. And my job is to support and train their staff. So I've been doing that this last year, and it's been challenging. It brings up my issues and my sensitivities, but I've been working with it. So how might it be applicable for people in business? If you're managing a company or managing people, how might IFS be helpful for you? And so I want to speak to that, but first I want to pause for a minute, because Catherine, I saw you like you were getting ready to ask your question or say something, and I want to make room for that.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much for. Um, let me come back um, to the IFS, because it will be present all along our discussion. So what I heard is that IFS has been able the method has been able to really, for you to get clarity, what are the parts in you, the different parts in you besides the self. There's the manager, then there's the firefighter, and who else was there too?
Yeah,
I
the
mean,
exiled part.
and to deal with that. So um, now, how can people best understand how their thoughts and feeling, do they have also to go to a therapist who knows IFS? How does it look like? Because I mean, you said it yourself. You have a coach who works with you, and so that you could also sort out your or explore your own manager, your own self, but also the other parts, right?
Right. Yeah. So that's a good question, Catherine. So, in my own experience, I initially listened to an online uh, interview with Richard Schwartz, and that gave me some information that I'd not been exposed to before. That allowed me to put some things together that I wasn't able to put together prior to viewing that video. So there's a lot of videos online on internal family systems, and with Richard Schwartz and a lot of other people that have been exploring the model. Um, and so, and there's also online seminars, online workshops that you can do either as a therapist or like as a coach, or just as a layperson who wants to find out about this stuff to help themselves and help their families.
Hmm.
And then there's further training that you can get into for that's designed for psychotherapists. And there's also a new training that's designed just for coaches that aren't trained as therapists. So you can, in my experience is anything you can do to expose yourself to this information is going to be helpful at some level. To do it really well, it really helps to have some really refined um, instruction and coaching, because it's hard, if not impossible, to do this work unless you've done your own internal work, relieving your parts of whatever burdens they're carrying. And the more that you do that, the more you're going to be in self energy. So that if someone says, something, my business is really having a hard time and I just feel suicidal about it. And instead of, the coach or the therapist going, oh my God, what are we going to do about that? Do we need to get you hospitalized? What can we do? Instead, if you can stay in your self energy, you can stay calm and you can say, so, tell me more about that. How long have you been feeling this way? And, what started this? And have you ever felt this way before? And, you can explore it with them in a calm way, which then helps the person start viewing what they're dealing with in a calmer way as well. But it's kind of like there's three different levels of training in IFS. I've done level 1 training. I'm in the middle of level 2 training, and there's also a level 3 training. And what to me, it's kind of like before you do a formal IFS training, it's like um, you've gone to graduate school and you have a master's degree in psychology, but you haven't done an internship yet. And maybe you're studying medicine and you want to become a doctor. You've got your doctor's degree, but you haven't done an internship yet. You haven't been mentored by someone, in the field. And so it's kind of like, with IFS, you go into the training, and it's like getting mentored in an internship for doing brain surgery. So
Hmm.
it can be very detailed and refined, dependent on the person you're dealing with, their wounds, the extent of the wounds that they've experienced. Um, so if a person has a complicated history with legacy trauma in their family, it's helpful to have someone who's very skilled and has had a lot of training in this model.
But now, I mean, how shall I say? I think that well, you feel maybe a little bit more in the US, but basically all the Western world is currently upside down. Bad news are everywhere. You have someone who's really creative sitting in the Oval Office for that, and which makes it that people I mean, feel scared and stuck, how can you, you have your former trauma, yes, but you are now you feel stuck in a situation where you maybe don't know the outcome. I mean, if you will keep your job, or as a leader, I mean, with all the uncertainty, tariff yes, tariff no, tariff yes, tariff no, the planning, I mean, which it's basically impossible to plan. So you feel yourself being trapped in a situation that's where many parameters are coming from the outside. How can IFS help you deal with that environment? I mean, without now talking meditation or yoga or doing some sport, how can IFS help you here?
Okay, that's a great question. So I just want to say one of the things that I've explored in the last couple of years is psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. So it uses ketamine, MDMA, mushrooms in combination with intensive therapy, and in combination, I've been using it in combination also with internal family systems for healing. And there's a lot of evidence out there that it's been very helpful for people recovering from PTSD who've experienced a lot of war, or people who have major depression symptoms. So um, it and let's take me back to your question again, Catherine, because I'm getting myself sidetracked.
Yeah, sure. I mean, once you have you might have your trauma. Every one of us has their trauma from the
Oh,
past.
okay.
But
Now,
now you're trapped in today's situation
right. So
that
now I
you
remember.
can't control.
So in my own psychedelic assisted therapy training and in my own parts work with internal family systems, every time I had a deep psychedelic experience, I would have to deal with Putin and Trump. I didn't like that in that psychedelic space. That was very unnerving. And over time I worked through what that was about for me, because to me that the unconsciousness and the narcissism and sociopathy that both of those men express scare the heck out of me, because my parents were like that. And so it gave me an opportunity to address the fear I had as a child around my parents. And then it allowed me to come back into my self energy instead of feeling afraid and overwhelmed by the current political situation, which then started allowing me to look around myself in my environment and go, okay, so is anybody there with a gun trying to shoot me right now? Well, no. Is anybody screaming at me? No. Okay, so this fear isn't in my immediate vicinity. So what can I do in the here and now to make a difference? And how can I do it rather than from anxiety or depression? How can I do it and stay in my self energy where there's nothing wrong? Now, there may be things wrong out there, in politics, or, in laws that are being made that aren't very human friendly,
Mhm.
but I don't have to let that stop me or slow me down, nor do I have to let it make me feel miserable. So when I'm in charge of my own parts from my self energy, I'm being self-led with my parts. It's easier for me to be self-led with other people's parts too, so I don't have to take their unconscious behavior and choices personally, and then I can keep on doing things to uh, in, exert influence on the situation in a positive way.
Because I'm French, meaning leading a revolution, right? I'm sorry. It was such a pass on to, but I mean, I laugh, but I mean, it is true. So, do I understand you right? Because often what happens is that as business leaders, if the situation gets dire, financial situation, whatever nature, and you have to act, some of the decisions, even if they're put behind, rational arguments like financial statements or results, results, but they're still driven by fear,
Right.
right?
Yes.
So how can best our leaders best react to, I mean, to bring in, I call that a certain space of creativity, of calm, before taking maybe some hard decisions which need to be taken for anyway, for whatever good, maybe less good reasons. Is IFS, how can leaders really tap into that? And I'm speaking about that because I think that in the business world, we're getting more and more conscious about the power of blind spots on one side, but also by all the cognitive biases by which we are driven, and which are basically um, giving us some orders on how we should behave, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So, um, so yeah, I mean, in any business, the people who are in the management controlling parts of the business, now you can make those business decisions, including hiring and firing. You can make it from a wounded part of yourself,
Mhm.
or you can make it from your self energy. And if you're making it from a wounded part, you're going to be not as creative, connected. You're not going to be able to see the long range impact of your choices. But if you can do it from a place of a calm, more loving energy, then that spreads out throughout the company. And so it's like how to move out of our heads, because if we're overly involved in our thoughts and our intellect, we're going to be missing some key important emotional relational aspects that need to be taken into account to be able to generate an atmosphere of safety where people can think clearly. Because if
Mhm.
you're not feeling safe, if you're an employee and you don't feel safe, you're not going to be thinking as calmly and clearly and creatively. And if you're a CEO and you're feeling scared and overwhelmed, you're going to be making decisions that are based on fear rather than a calm, more holistic approach to the problem.
Now, how does an employee, a team leader, a manager, or how should they act if the person above them is acting out of greed and doesn't care I mean, from the outside,
Right.
doesn't care for the team members, for the employees, what they want to, and there are many, unfortunately, there are many um, senior executives who are more focused on the bonus, the end year bonus that they are going to get, rather than maybe the well-being of their teams. How do you how can you influence, or is it possible to influence these people so that it's not to convince them to act differently, but maybe that there is another option?
Right. So again, a good question. So like if you can stay in your self energy and you're engaging with a CEO that's really doubling down on greed, for example. So and you're looking at them going, it seems to me they're not in their self energy. They just seem to really to be greedy. They're just really interested in what kind of money they're going to make at the end of the year. And so it's not personal to me, but I'm seeing it happen. So how can I influence this person? Now, if we take what they're doing personally, that CEO is probably not going to want to talk to us because we're going to be judgmental or angry. But if we can go to them and say, "So I'm curious about some of the decisions that you've been making. Would you be willing to talk with me about it? Because I think I have some ideas that could be helpful for the bottom line." And they'd probably be more open to that conversation. And so you can start shifting the conversation to include other ways of looking at the situation, because if the CEO is really in a greedy place and just looking at his bonus at the end of the year, he's going to be missing some things for the company, for the long-term health and viability of the company. And so you can keep on bringing that influence, of the self energy to the CEO and to the company. And so it's like how to stay in that creative energy of the self.
I agree. And what do you do if you have a whole army, or let's say the majority of the senior leadership is maybe not out of greed, but more maybe of a narcissistic, they have more narcissistic traits. How do you, I mean, what do you do so that you don't feel like Don Quixote, running against the windmills alone? But I mean, in the end, if does it help you also to take maybe the right decision, eventually also to quit, and to go somewhere else? Because I mean, if you have um, we say in French, it doesn't matter if you swim against the stream, alone, because you won't be able to advance if you are, against the stream. What can you do here? How can IFS help you? Is it about that you don't start to blame yourself?
Yeah, clearly, because blaming yourself isn't part of the self energy. That would be a wounded part. And so a blaming part is a part that's actually trying to help the system some way. If it can blame us for something, we might back away from saying something or doing something because we don't want to be blamed. And so we learn to maybe do that to keep ourselves safe when we were 8 years old. So, then the question is, how do we stay in our self energy and not let the fear of getting blamed or having a part blame us, how to be able to ask that part to back up or find out what is its concern if it didn't control us with blame.
Mm-hmm.
And so then
Mm-hmm.
we get to know these parts so that we can help them unburden and then come back into our self energy. Because this is a flowing system. This isn't like, oh, one day we're going to wake up and we're going to be 100% in self energy. It's like, sometimes we're going to be in 10% of self energy. Sometimes we're going to be in 90% of self energy. And so we tend to flow back and forth between those extremes. But over time, if we have an openness to get curious about our parts and helping them unburden, we spend more and more time in self energy. And in self energy, we're just gonna be able to flow much more easily. So if we keep on running into windmills that keep on whacking us with the blades, at some point we're going to probably go, well, this isn't personal really. So am I having the kind of influence that I want to have? And if I'm not, then I need to either get off the horse and look at some other options in where I'm at, or go to a different company where I can leverage my energy as a human being
Mm-hmm.
to have a bigger impact on the larger milieu of the social environment and the business environment. So, but again, I mean, a person can go, well, I can't quit because then I'd be a quitter. So I have to keep on, charging against windmills like Don Quixote. Well, that to me sounds like a wounded belief system. And wounded belief systems aren't going to help us stay in self energy, but we can get to know the part that's carrying a wounded belief system,
Yes.
and we can help it unburden. We can help it. And then when these parts become unburdened, they start revealing their resources, because underneath the burdens are resources, joy, happiness, creativity, curiosity, energy. And we want that stuff with these parts. But the burdens, we can learn to help unburden.
You give me tell me if my idea is realistic or not. I mean, there are now also some coaches about who are specialized in recognizing, cognitive biases, and to see, okay, what is the best approach to undo them, or that we become conscious of them. And because you mentioned at the very beginning that there are also IFS coaches, do you think that also hiring an IFS coach could be someone who could bring and something of value within a company?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
because it's not
absolutely.
a therapy per se, it's about opening the our conscious to that there are several parts, and so that we can start then also within the leadership start saying, okay, Doug, I think that's we are talking here from a wounded place, don't we? Or you see what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and um, so to speak to that specifically, so a year ago, I went to work for this company that serves families that have adopted children, and
Hmm.
the person who started the company, which is now 150 people strong, is an old friend of mine. He's a therapist, and he's been doing this work for 25 years, and he's brilliant at working with these families and these kids. He's brilliant at doing it himself with the family, him working with a family. But now he's got 150 employees, and he's looking at that going, "Oh, I haven't done this before. This is not an arena that I'm not as well versed in." And so he started making some uh, decisions from his parts that were carrying wounds, and
Hmm.
he kept on getting feedback, from people. They, whoa, this isn't good. This doesn't feel good. I don't like it. And so he and I talked, and he said, look, why don't you come in and you help me with these parts that I'm not so good at. And so I've been bringing some IFS training into the company. So that's something I just started doing. And frankly, it's been challenging at times because nobody knows what IFS is. I'm the Lone Ranger there, which makes me that triggers for me remembering I felt like I was the Lone Ranger as a kid. So I've
Uh-huh.
had to deal with that part of me to be able to keep coming back to the company in rather than in helplessness and depression, coming back with curiosity and going, okay, how am I going to deal with this situation? And how am I going to deal with this person? And how am I going to deal with this frozen point of view? So it's been helping me stay in a creative place with the company. And with that, it's allowed me to start looking at, well, surely this has been done in other places, bringing this new psychological technology into a company. Surely it's been done someplace before. So I started doing some research, and I found out that there's a treatment center on the East Coast that was started in 1939 by Bill Wilson, who is one of the two men who started Alcoholics Anonymous. So this program is a residential program. It's a 28-day program to help people recover from addictions. And so they made they developed a relationship with IFS, Internal Family Systems, and IFS came in and did a level 1 training for all of their treatment staff.
Hmm.
And it worked out so well. It gave them all a common language that's loving, non-shame based, non-critical, more curious, more alive. It brought that kind of energy to the company, and it worked out so well that they came in, and then just recently they completed a level 2 training for all of the treatment staff. So I've been in communication with that treatment center, and learning about how they implemented this, how it's working out, and it sounds really positive. Also, this morning I had a conversation with a man who was working with Richard Schwartz 20 years ago, and he is level 2 trained in the IFS model, except rather than in a therapeutic arena, he, in the last 20 years, has been using IFS in a business community model. And so
Hmm.
I just talked with him this morning. I didn't know he existed, but he's been doing this kind of coaching work with businesses and with CEOs and managers now for 20 years. And so I now have developed a relationship with him, and I'm going to start working with him as well. So, this, like I say, I've been in this field for 40 years here in California, and I never heard of IFS except 2 years ago. And so I am excited about it, about the possibilities now. And the world needs this model.
Yes.
I mean, from my point of view, the world needs this model. And for those of us who can take this patchwork education and run with it, it opens up a counterpoint to a lot of the unconsciousness that we're witnessing around the globe that has to do with making decisions that are greed-based and power-based rather than relationally based.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Excellent, excellent. I'm conscious that you still have a afternoon of sessions, therapeutic sessions. So we shall maybe come to the end. I know also that you're someone who is really busy. So what I would suggest is, if people have some questions, that I collect them and that I bring them to you, and that we can maybe tailor then the answer accordingly, so that I this time I'm going to say I channel the questions or the requests, so that we don't give you too much work. But I mean, the person you mentioned is definitely a name that I would like, to learn about, and which I would like to post maybe later on in the comments. Because I think that from everything that you've shared with us today, it is definitely a system that I think it's relevant. And I must say, I'm learning every time you're speaking about IFS with me. I'm tuk processing and learning a little bit more. And even, I mean, if you told me that, I think must be now the fifth or sixth time I'm learning every time something where I'm saying, haha. So thank you so much, Doug, for your time and what you shared with us, and to the audience. Well, I wish you a good evening or a good day, depending on which side of the world you're sitting. And I see you soon again. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Doug. Bye-bye.